Washington State and Oregon State coming to the Big 12 makes sense geographically, but does that matter? Does it really matter? This is a Locked On Big 12 Locked On Cougars crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Cougars. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making these two shows your first listen every single day. Today, having a conversation with Jake about Washington State, Oregon State, the regionality that it would bring to the Big 12 for the schools that are out west, and if it makes sense financially. Jake, off the riff here. When you think, I know we had this conversation about a month and a half ago, but now more sources, more people are talking about ESPN bringing these two entities into the Big 12 conference. When you think about the two universities from a BYU standpoint, do you say, on the one hand, yes, bring it, great people, good schools, or no, don't, it's unnecessary?
I think from the BYU side of things, I think the more the merrier. And quite honestly, I think BYU has a lot of empathy for what Washington State and Oregon State have faced. Obviously, they were Power 5. They were part of the Pac-12. They had been cashing these massive revenue checks. And I think BYU can commiserate watching them essentially kind of fall by the wayside here, because BYU spent over a decade chasing where they're at right now in the Big 12 conference. So I think, quite frankly, speaking for BYU, I think they would be okay with another set of Cougars and obviously the Beavers joining the conference.
I know it's been 1 year. BYU has not gotten the full effect of a Big 12 schedule and what it will be like to travel the country, but let's talk that. Based on the sample size of a single fall, does it feel like BYU already, and I know West Virginia fans are throwing things right now. They've been dealing with it for 10 years in the Big 12 conference. Nobody close to them, no driving distance. For BYU, do you already want somebody who gives you at least a little bit, oh, hey, look, that airport's closer to us?
Absolutely. I think BYU fans are all about some regionality. And the other thing about this, Drake, and you and I talked about this, I think the last time I was on with you, is we talked about the fact of potentially expanding this conference to where it's maybe 24 teams, and then maybe you split it down the middle and go with like some 12-team divisions, for lack of a better term, and maybe do it that way where, yeah, you keep it more regional for the BYUs and the Arizona schools, Utah, obviously, out here in the West, and those Eastern wing, obviously, would have more regionality. And you can have crossover matchups, obviously, but I think Cougar fans would all about being able to travel to, let's say, Portland to go to Corvallis and also go to Moscow, Idaho to drive across the border to Pullman, Washington. I think they'd be all about having some more regional matchups and be able to make some quicker trips, as it were.
The idea, somebody out there is confused. I know somebody's listening and they're like, what, how are we doing this? So bear with me for a second here, Jake. The Washington State, Oregon State left off the Pac-12 table situation sucked. And the reason that happened was the ACC maybe is gunning for Notre Dame and wants to bring in a Stanford or a Cal or some of these schools that Notre Dame might feel more enticed by to join their conference. And then you look over at, hey, wait a second, they've got Directors Cup going for them. What if we leave Washington State, Oregon State off the table? They have historically not that good, but Washington State's TV viewership is spectacular. Oregon State, good at football. I know you watched the game where they beat the brakes off of Utah this last year, decimated Utah. They will bring a certain piece of viability into the conference. This isn't just an orphanage, we'll take whoever and for whatever. And if ESPN sees they are going to make us money, us being ESPN, they will move the two schools to the Big 12 conference. Is there any aura? What I get from some of these new schools already is, hey, whoa, expansion's a lot right now. Can we settle down? Can we settle in? Is there a need for BYU to settle in, or is this university ready to tackle a conference that has 18, 20, 24 teams?
I think BYU is ready to thrive wherever they happen to be at, because they, like I said, they chased this 13 years as an independent, Drake. And trust me, there was a lot of wondering at points during that independent run from 2010 all the way through 2023 about when BYU might leave independence. Would they go back to the Mountain West? And when the Big 12 invite came, there were a lot of people in Provo who were thinking they're lucky stars, because it was a really, really tough road to do what they did, to be an independent. They played all over the country, obviously, and they had a lot of cachet that way, having played some of the biggest teams across the country. But the Cougars wanted to be where they're at right now. And let's say the Big 12 is going to go to 18 or 24 teams. I think they'll embrace it all the same. I think Cougar fans are very, very happy to be part of the Big 12 conference. They want to be a part of this. They want to compete at the highest level. And if it means that more teams need to join the conference and have to compete that way, I think BYU says bring them on.
I love BYU. I know, like it's not shocking at all. Yeah. I love the camaraderie and the kindness, and the biggest question that I have as this conference begins to add, and we'll end this portion of the show with it, as this conference continues to add good football programs, and I don't even know if I'd call Washington State and Oregon State good or better than BYU in the last 2, 3, 4 decades. I wouldn't. However, they've been good recently. Louisville's been good recently. Miami is Miami. We've seen some of these teams in expansion rumors who are actually good on the gridiron. Is BYU intimidated by schools that are being added that might be in a better spot from a wins and losses standpoint right now?
I don't think so. I think the biggest thing for BYU is they just want to have the opportunity to compete against the best. Now, you can say that the Big 12 is going to be a second-tier conference because the SEC and the Big 10 have scooped up the quote-unquote big boys across those two leagues. But I meant to mention this earlier, Drake. I threw it out to my Locked On Cougars insider group, and I knew I was coming on with you, and asked them, give me your guys' feedback. I want to know what you guys would make of Oregon State and Washington State joining the league. And I essentially gave them, I think, 5 different options. Essentially, yes, do it yesterday. I'm okay with it. Indifferent. Don't want it, and no thank you. And I'm going to tell you, Drake, more than half of the responses, I'm going to pull this right now. Let's see. So yeah, more than half of the responses are either, yeah, I'm okay with it, or let's make it happen. So I think Cougar fans are totally okay with the Big 12 continuing to expand. They understand that Brett Yormark has every intention of making this one of the premier conferences. If he, with every opportunity he has to do that, he's going to chase them all down, whether that is to rename the conference, the All-State 12, whatever they decide to go on that front, whether it is to join with Oregon State and Washington State and bringing them in. Maybe he goes east and, yeah, scoops up maybe 5 or 6 members of the ACC to make it a true 24-team conference. I think any and all of that is something that BYU and BYU fans would say, you know what, we're okay with this because it's an opportunity to compete. It's an opportunity to travel to new places. BYU and Miami have got a strong history, Drake. I don't know how much you know of that. 1990, Ty Detmer kicked off his Heisman Trophy campaign with a major upset of the defending national champions in Provo. It's still talked about to this day. What are we now, 34 years? No, 34 years later that it went down. So there'd be a lot of fun things that would happen, I think, with expansion. So I'm speaking for BYU fans, but I'm all in favor of it, whether it is Oregon State, Washington State, or any number of a handful of those ACC schools as well.
That game predates me by 11 years. I would not exist for another 11 years.
I was 3 years old, and there's a famous story with my parents that I threw a fit because I couldn't go to that game because they actually went to it.
Wow. That's awesome. BYU through and through. That's Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars, who's going to stick around with us. Can BYU be the next TCU, the next West Virginia? What do I mean by that? Well, it's Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. And you're going, Drake, what's Game Time? It's always Game Time for me. That's where I buy my tickets to things. Bud, let me tell you this. I'm going to a concert in Salt Lake City, Utah. That's right. On August 20th, because Tyler Childers is playing there, and Bella White is opening, and Shaky Graves is opening, and I love all 3 of those artists, and I really wanted to go. And you say, Drake, how did you get your tickets for so cheap? Because usually you go to Tyler Childers concerts like once every 6 months, and they're $350 or $650. Sit in the pit. We know that you like 2 things, food and concerts, and you always buy high prices, but not anymore. Because at Game Time, they're $182. That's right, $182, which is way less than they usually are. Game Time has flash deals, zone deals, all in pricing. Toggle the feature. See what the price is without any haggled fees at the end. Get a seat view. Get the lowest price guaranteed and get Game Time ticket coverage, the most flexible customer service policy in the industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download Game Time app. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets. Lowest prices. It's guaranteed. Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars. I have this fancy schmancy little magazine right here that tells me the best teams in the Big 12. It's from Brett Ciencia, Pick 6 Previews, my favorite college football magazine. It's one of the most accurate in the country, and it's not afraid to make your team sad. And I got bad news for you. It does make BYU fans sad. Kansas State, Utah, Arizona, Oklahoma State, we know are being really highly touted preseason. BYU, according to this magazine, will finish 15th in the Big 12. On a scale of 1 to good, Jake, that's not. However, this is the same magazine that was very low on West Virginia last year and wasn't too high on TCU the year prior in Sonny Dykes' first campaign. That TCU team goes to the national championship. That West Virginia team shocks everybody, wins 9 games, and douses its head coach in mayonnaise. Can BYU be one of those two teams and have that kind of story in 2024?
Can they? Yes, they can. But there's going to be obviously some things that need to happen for them to live that dream. Now, I'll give props to Brett. I've known him for quite some time, just like you, and he does a really, really good job prognosticating things. But that's what they are. They're prognostications. They're looking ahead, trying to take past information and forecast ahead. The biggest thing for BYU this fall, Drake, is that they need to go out there, get steady quarterback play that can get the ball in the hands of BYU's playmakers. I think outside of quarterback on BYU's offense, they've actually got quite a bit of depth at wide receiver. I think running backs fairly deep. I think the offensive line has got a newfound just optimism for what they can accomplish with a new coach leading the way there. And the tight end unit, I think, has got a lot of guys that can contribute as well. So if you can get steady quarterback play, I'm talking from the offensive perspective, who can get the ball into the hands of his playmakers, doesn't have to necessarily be the Tom Brady, as it were, for BYU football. But if he can be that guy that can get the ball out to those playmakers, let them make him look good, that would go a long way to helping BYU surpass, maybe a forecast of finishing 15th in a 16-team league.
I have confidence that Kalani Sitake can win. And I have confidence that if he doesn't win, he's still the head coach at BYU next season. This was the first losing year for the Cougars since 2017. So it's not like the program is gloom and doom after going 5-7 when joining a brand new conference. There are plenty of other schools who struggle their first year, making a complete jump up. However, based on last year's analytics, 102nd in scoring offense, 121st in total offense, 117th in yards per play. And I know there are returners, including Jake Retzloff at quarterback or Gary Bohannon, who you've added, and it's a very important position. But how does BYU take those numbers with similar and different guys and completely reverse the script in 1 year?
First things first, better offensive line play. They fired their offensive line coach shortly after that season ended and replaced him with TJ Woods. And TJ Woods' track record suggests when he has talent on his offensive lines, everywhere he's been, he's gotten results from them. And I can tell you, having watched parts of 3 practices so far in training camp for BYU, that I'm seeing a much improved offensive line. Now, that's them going against their own guys. Obviously, that will have to translate when they get out there against real opposition coming up this fall. But the O-line last year just absolutely crippled everything BYU tried to do. There was a long stretch there, Drake. I think almost about 8 games of the season last year, BYU was trending towards its lowest rushing output since before 1950. It was that paltry of an output especially from the rushing offense. So if you can get better offensive line play, allow BYU's running backs to have a little breathing room when it comes to running the ball, because it felt like time and time again, these guys are getting hit, whether it was in the hole or in the backfield, that just absolutely dismantled everything BYU tried to build offensively. I think with better offensive line play led by some guys like Connor Pay, who's a regular on my show as a guest host, also guys like Caleb Etienne, Braden Kime, if you can get some steady offensive line play, I think we go a really, really long way to helping BYU boost those numbers, simply due to the fact that they have competency up front.
Defensively, Jake, bad news. 99th in scoring defense. And look, this is not me ragging. I've already said it once this show. I love BYU.
Here's the thing, Drake. I think any BYU fan watching this knows numbers do not lie. And the numbers last season for BYU, quite literally across the board, especially defensively, were frankly atrocious.
Yeah, not good. Yes. 99th scoring defense, 109th in yards per game, allowed 119th in third down conversion percentage, which is that's a real telltale stat. Same question, different side of the ball. How do you take both newcomers and the same guys who weren't very good and now make them good in the Big 12?
The hope is that Jay Hill finally has gotten his guys on the same page. There were a lot of guys I felt like were good players in BYU's defense last year, but we're talking maybe 5 or 6 guys at any given time, and you have 11 guys on the field. I think this year they're far more cohesive in terms of understanding what each level of that defense is expected to do on any given play. I used the analogy not that long ago on my podcast of Jay Hill going through a year 0 defensively, where he had to tear it all the way down, quite literally to the foundation, and build it back up. And there were moments, highlights last season, but the numbers, as I mentioned, they do not lie. And BYU's numbers defensively were awful. They were the worst Power 4 sack team last season. Just brutal statistics. I think simply with some seasoning, finally understanding more of what Jay Hill expects from his defensive guys, and getting these guys to understand, okay, I'm a cornerback. What are the safeties doing? What are the linebackers doing? Knowing what each one of your guys around you is going to do, and then you can trust that you're going to go and do your assignment on any given play. I think that will go a long way to helping this defense improve. And the early reports out of training camp from people I've talked to and what I've seen is that they look far more in sync than they did for long stretches of last fall.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading here about TCU the year prior to going to a national championship. West Virginia, the same thing prior to going 9 wins. Look at Baylor, went from 2-7 to 12-2. So the Big 12's had that school the last 3 years. They also sucked in pretty much every category the year before they turned it around. And somebody out there was going, oh, this host is an idiot who's blowing hot air up my butt. And you're not.
Hey, here's the thing. I'm not trying to convince anybody that BYU is going to be that turnaround team, but the opportunity exists because they've got a lot of things going for them. I think they've attracted fairly good depth. Jay Hill has been very adamant that the freshman class of defensive players that they've brought in are challenging for playing time. I can think of 4 of them off the top of my head right now that are already competing in the 2 deep in training camp for BYU. Now, you can see it as a positive or a negative. I choose to see it as these guys pushing veterans out of the way and essentially saying, no, I'm the better player. Give me the playing time. And I think that will benefit BYU in the long run. The other thing I wanted to ask you from your perspective is that you look at this from more of a conference-wide perspective. And I love your podcast. I listen to it every single day. It's true. I'm an everydayer, as we like to say here on the network. But give me your perspective. What gives you, from your conference-wide lens, why BYU might be able to be that rebound team?
It is consistency. What I have said about BYU, and I've said this on Locked On Utes, I've said this on Locked On Big 12, it is the consistency of the coaching staff. Look at a lot of these Big 12 teams that are trying to establish or reestablish, and BYU doesn't have to do that. They've got a head coach in Kalani Sitake who's been there long enough. His culture's instilled. He has won under that culture. He has won consistently before, going back to that 2020 to 2021 seasons. And even in 2022, I mean, you're a couple of plays away from a much different year, a couple injuries away from a much different year, much more successful. And that's why I like BYU. I believe with that consistency and culture comes better O-line play. And recruiting out of Utah, you see a lot of quality offensive linemen, defensive linemen come out of the state of Utah. That's a position, or a group, I should say, that BYU can quickly improve. Then there's the flip side of Shadur Sanders or KJ Jefferson or Garrett Green or Rocco Becht or Cam Rising. You could name 8 guys that are darn good quarterbacks in the Big 12, or go to C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White and DJ Giddens and start naming the running back. Ollie Gordon.
I would say Ollie Gordon. Yeah.
Like Busama, some crazy good running backs. And then you point at BYU and say, who's that star? Who's that guy that we already know is going to be elite offensively? And I think that's where I struggle the most.
Well, okay, and I'll just add this. You talk about the star quarterbacks, the star running backs BYU is going to see. I'm telling you right now, Drake, I'm still not convinced that BYU's got the quote-unquote horses on the defensive line that can, I think, hold up the way that I think that they envision they can, if that makes sense. I think coaching staff is trying to sell something that I'm not fully buying there. I hope I'm wrong, because if they don't have the horses on that defensive line, Ollie Gordon and the rest of those running backs in the Big 12 are going to run wild on them. And then, no pressure on any of these quarterbacks. Guess what? Shadur Sanders will just sit back there and pick you apart, just to use him as an example. So they've got questions to answer, speaking of BYU offensively and defensively. But if the pieces come together, there is an opportunity for them, yes, to be that surprise team.
And guess what? There's somebody out there who hears that. They're like, well, if the pieces came together for every team, there will be teams where the pieces Brock Purdy's Iowa State team. There will be teams where the pieces do not come together and better squads lose to schools and cultures that have it put together. Coming up on Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Cougs, BYU is going to upset this team. Up next. Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars joining Locked On Big 12 today. BYU is going to upset this school in 2024, and it may be Utah. But before we get there, Jake, to your answer, what I first need to know, before we get to, hey, they can upset this team, I need to know the Moxie meter, where the school is, because I've seen the old documentaries about the game between Michigan and Ohio State. And, any year that Michigan wins a national championship, Ohio State puts a big banner of it on the floor in their locker room. And that's what you have to walk over on the way to practice every day. BYU lost its last 5 games, 0-5 down the stretch last season. How much of that is ingrained in this team to try to reverse it this season?
Well, let's just put it this way. They've heard it every single day all off season long. There's a video they put out from their strength staff not that long ago, and it's like one microcosm. But one of the strength coaches, Drake, they're doing these workouts in Lavelle Edwards Stadium, running stairs, and he says, hey, you guys want to go 5-7 again next year? Do what you're doing right now. And trust me, they have heard that time and time again. I had one of the coaches I was just talking to off to the side of practice the first day of training camp. And I said, how much is that 0-5 that you guys suffered down the stretch sticking with you? And he said, we literally think about it every single day. And that is a highly, highly motivating factor. This is a BYU program that aspires to be great, Drake. And I think they understand that there was going to be struggles making the transition to the Big 12, but they do not like the fact that everybody feels like they are a crappy program, and they are that 5-7 team that went 2-7 down the stretch a season ago with that 5-game losing streak to lose out. They consider themselves to be a middle tier Big 12 program at the very worst. And right now they're near the bottom. And I don't think that sits well with anybody in Provo.
The schedule this season, it's not crazy to me that BYU beats Southern Illinois. And I don't think for me, it's that crazy. SMU and Wyoming, though those games are on the road. However, they're the ones you build in, like Kansas State and Oklahoma State and Utah and Kansas, that are really good football programs. Where does the big marquee win, the game-changing, season-changing win, come from BYU? And again, this is us talking about it on Wednesday, August 7th.
Now, I know I want it to be Utah. I'll be frank. You always want that rivalry win over the Utes. But, Drake, I'm going to go a little bit opposite. I'm going to go with their Big 12 opener, Kansas State. Avery Johnson coming to Provo, Utah. If I'm not mistaken, it'll be his first true road start as a starting quarterback for KSU. I think BYU wants to make a big kind of message and just show the Big 12 what they're made of. Go and beat Kansas State at home and probably under the lights in late September there in Provo, and really show the Big 12, hey, maybe BYU is a little bit better than we considered. Now, that would obviously be the first of what will end up being 9 Big 12 games. You have to do it again the following week, and obviously every week from there on out. But I think it would go a long way to, engendering a lot of confidence that BYU maybe isn't as bad as we all perceive they are if they can kick off Big 12 play by going 1-0 and knocking off the team that is literally just footsteps behind Utah in terms of the favorites in the Big 12.
A lot of people have Kansas State beating everyone else in the conference to win the championship. And those who don't have Kansas State very likely have Utah. Those seem to be the two popular picks. Is it atmosphere alone, or is there, and again, it's August 7th. We don't know how the depth charts exactly are going to shake out. Is it atmosphere alone that you lean on here in this matchup, or is there already something you think, hey, schematically, X's and O's, this guy, this hat versus this hat, BYU can find an advantage?
I think the biggest thing for them, if it's the Kansas State example, or even if Cam Rising with Utah for the same thing, you bottle up that quarterback. I think that would give you a really, really good opportunity. They're both quarterbacks that like to make plays with their legs. Now, Avery Johnson has got elite speed. We all know this. This is a kid that is expected to really open up this Kansas State offense. But Jay Hill and that defense, and it's a borrow from Utah. He, Kalani Sitake, both learned this under the tutelage of University of Utah head coach Kyle Whittingham. It is a defense that is built to stop the run, including quarterback run. If you can bottle up Avery Johnson, the Kansas State example, or if you can slow down Cam Rising and make it so it's a one-dimensional team where you're putting that game on the arm of either Avery Johnson or Cam Rising, who both of which have yet to really prove that they can win a game, it feels like, truly with their arm, that would go a long way to helping BYU win those games. Now, It's a whole lot easier said than done because those are two of the best quarterbacks in this league. But if BYU wants to have the hope of doing it, yeah, you got to make them one-dimensional and tell those quarterbacks, you're going to beat us with your arm. If you can do that, props to you, but you will not beat us with your feet.
Avery Johnson and DJ Giddens were both on the roster last year for Kansas State. Here's where I give BYU the window. Kansas State was, gosh, I love this magazine. It's so good. Kansas State had the 67th best rushing offense in the country or best rushing defense in the country last season. And their rushing offense their offense in general is one that doesn't return enough. 47% of their offense returns. That is 106th in the country. So while the rushing offense was really good, and they bring two of their best guys back, and Edwards and they're going to be able to run the football, they can't defend the run. And guess what? I know BYU doesn't have an Ollie Gordon back there. They don't have a Shadur Sanders calling the shots. I've seen Gary Bohannon win a Sugar Bowl. I've seen Gary Bohannon run for the Roses. Like, the dude has got some speed. And maybe if it's not Gary Bohannon, I knew Jake Retzloff isn't the guy who's just going to stand there. You can't be in modern college football. There are two things. One, the fact that Kansas State, this is big, was not very good defensively against the rush last year. And I think BYU could be better if the offensive line is better this year. And number two, if that Kansas State, but here's the deal. Okay, Jake, sorry, I'm on a tangent. I'm helping you. What the magazine says, Jake, if I am a coach, if I'm a head coach, I want my defense to be more inexperienced on the road. And you're like, wait a second, what? Buddy, an inexperienced offense, a quarterback who's starting for the first time, and it's in Lavelle Edwards Stadium, that's not good. Kansas State is 106th in the country in return offensive production. When the DB's hands are shaking, all right, well, we're going to figure it out. Give him a couple plays. It's not coming at him. When the quarterback's hands are shaking, when the left tackle's hands are shaking, when the receiver, those are the guys it's going to you. Yeah. BYU can expose that with a great atmosphere. So this is where, Jake, you take the floor for the next minute and tell everyone and their mother to show up at that game, make it a night game, do the fire thing. Oh, yeah. And just make it hostile.
It's going to be 63,000 plus. I'll tell you right now, Drake, it is absolutely going to be jam-packed. BYU fans are, even with the down season a year ago, Cougar fans are still ecstatic to be in the Big 12 Conference. And the crazy thing is, their home schedule last year versus the home schedule this year are night and day different. They've got a lot better home games this year, so you can guarantee that there is going to be a fever pitch in Provo. Even if they kick it off mid-afternoon, evening, late night, doesn't matter when it's going to happen. Kansas State's walking into a beehive, to use the example. We're in Utah, we can use the beehive obviously out here, but the biggest thing is that the Cougar fans, they're always behind their team, even if their team's not that good. This is a fan base that has been tried and true for years. They've gone all over the country in that independent era. They showed up in places. I know that you're down there in Savannah. They went to Georgia Southern and outnumbered Georgia Southern fans not too far away from where you're at. They've been to Middle Tennessee State, using some G5 examples. They've gone to Wisconsin. They've gone to Tennessee. BYU's played in some of those bigger environments. Guess what? LES, as we like to call it, Lavelle Edwards Stadium, is absolutely electric when the fans are into it. And with the Big 12 opener and Kansas State coming in, you can guarantee it is absolutely going to be buzzing all night long.
I'm excited. Gosh dang, now it'll be a tax write-off, though. I'll book my flights tonight. At least it's a tax write-off. Jake, I yelled a lot. Where can people who want more of you find more of you?
Yeah, check out Locked On Cougars wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube, like Locked On Big 12. Excuse me there. If you want my thoughts on all things sports, I'm at Jacob C. Hatch on X or Twitter. You also can follow the show Locked On Cougars. It's also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well.
That's Jake Hatch. I'm Drake Toll. This has been, it always will be, Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Cougars and Dose Grande.